Hello again, this is a video for Chapter 11, Community Politics. We're going to talk about how communities make decisions, basically. And the best way to do that is to take a little bit of a comparative look at how people arrived at decisions in their cities, in urban governments that we talked about last chapter. There's a chartered, incorporated governments. How did cities come to make decisions in the past, and how has that changed over time? Okay, that's how we're going to look at this. And again, I'm just guiding you through the chapter for your purposes of study. Participation in politics, the authors talk about the communitarian view. And what the communitarian view suggests is that everyone should participate as fully as possible in their local government, because a local government is the rubber where the rubber meets the road. Local governance is the location where laws and regulations and rules that affect you and I, that's where most of them are made, and that's where we have most opportunity to make change. The text talks about conflict, it talks about voting, it talks about public regarding this. One of the things you want to keep in mind about participation in government at the local level is that, for the most part, the biggest arrow in our quiver of tools of participation is voting. And interestingly, the most services that you and I receive happen at the local level: the streets, healthcare, environmental concerns, education, and so on, parks and recreation. Most services happen at the local level, and the least services happen at the national level. A lot of more theoretical and idealistical stuff happen at national government, but we get served by the local government. But interestingly, most people vote at the national election, and only a small percentage vote in the local election. So it's kind of like lots of things happen at the local level, but that's where we participate the least. It's a very interesting sort of turn of events, if you will. In fact, another factor is that, as we talked about in an earlier chapter, the most likely way of determining who votes is by age. The older persons are, the more likely that they vote regularly. And it's interesting to me because if you think about the largest budgeted item at the local level is education. And so education is very expensive at the local level in cities and counties, and it affects young people who have children. So older folks come out and vote a lot in droves, and they typically vote against school budgets for funds for programs that younger voters have children in schools need and want. So that's kind of an opposite effect, if you will, on voting and how much funding we use and in what ways. But anyway, getting back to how decisions are made, the textbook talks about machine political systems and how they have been reformed. Early on in our political system, we had what's referred to as machine political systems. They have, since the early part of this past century, the 20th century, gone out of style, if you will. But they were very big in the 18th and 19th centuries and early 20th century. Machine politics happened because lots of people migrated to the United States just after the Civil War, the war between the states, and that immigration took place at the same time that the country became heavily industrialized. So there was a need for bodies to work in factories in those days between 1867, 1880, 1890, and all the way through the middle part of the 20th century. Also, at the same time, because of such a high influx of people from other countries into the United States and the tremendous growth of manufacturing and industry, and a terrific growth in transportation, particularly railroads, there were lots of problems that happened, what's referred to as the ills of the city. Child labor, sewage systems needed to be built, air pollution, dangerous and catastrophic kinds of machineries where people's limbs were being lopped off and they were being killed by getting caught in machinery. Transportation systems like the railways that used coal and wood, polluting the air. People living in claptrap kinds of high-rise buildings made of wood with no fire extinguisher systems, and firefighting was novel in those days. So there were lots of difficulties, life-threatening difficulties in cities that needed to be attended to. So what happened was, as the book points out, and I don't want to go into this very deeply, but what happened was leaders rose up within these groups of people, leadership for the Italians, for the Polish, for the Lithuanians, African Americans, Hispanics, and these leaders were able to get voted into office for city governance, and then they would in turn be very favorable to the people that put them in office by giving them material benefits, jobs, which is referred to patronage, turkeys that they needed on Thanksgiving dinners, books for their kids, clothing if they needed it. They'd find them a house or a little small apartment to live in if they needed a place to live. There was a lot of corruption, a lot of vote purchasing through patronage and material benefits, and in general a loss of democracy. People were not free any longer to vote for who they wanted. They basically felt they were contracted, if you will, not a legal contract, but a sort of mental contract, to vote for those very strong politicians. Again, it's referred to as machine politics. People were electing those very strong politicians who were able to get them jobs and other kinds of material rewards. Well, this loss of freedom or loss of democracy didn't play very well across America. And we see on page 375, we notice an aftershock, if you will, in this regard, where reform-minded people around the turn of the century, around the years 1910, 1920, 1930, where lots of reform-minded people came into political office and decided to try to wipe out any vestiges of machine politics that had its grip on urban governments. So you take a look at page 375. The goals of reform politicians are listed there, and then the reasons why on page 376 machine governments declined, and then page 376 also into 377 there's a discussion about the new personalized machines. Part of the movement to do away with these organized machines came from the civil rights and reform movements, from governments recognizing that they were expending themselves out of existence. So we have privatization, reinvention of governments, civil service, and lots of reforms that came into existence to try to break down these lockholds that machine politician leaders had on governments in those days. It was an attempt to bring ethics back into local governments more so than had existed prior under the machine system. The text then goes into a discussion about why people run for office in cities and local governments, and basically they run for office because they have a vested interest of some kind in the local government. If someone here ran for political office to be on the town council for Tazewell or New Tazewell, probably they lived in the area for a long time, if not born in the area. They've seen changes that they either like or don't like, and they want to be on town council so they can be part of the decision-making apparatus. Take a look at that discussion as to why people run for office. There's much more to it than I'm telling you here. And also, there's a discussion about councilmen and city managers and mayors, are they accountable to the general public? That's a discussion you want to read and become familiar with as well. One of the reforms to urban governments that came about in the early part of the 19th, 20th century is city managers. City managers are thought to be professionals. They go to college for degrees in public administration and political science, sometimes business, and they go on to get master's degrees in public administration, and they become city managers. In fact, there's a demand for people who are knowledgeable about budgeting, professional and ethical decision making, how cities are organized, planning, economic development. All of those kinds of fields of interest happen under the city management form of government. I'd ask you to take a look at that discussion in the text. There's a whole discussion about mayors, how their powers are limited, how their powers are free-floating, what their powers are. There's a discussion also about interest groups and politics and the influence that interest groups have over city governments and mayors. Take a look at that discussion and email me if you have any questions. Thank you.